Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the show. Today, I'm joined by Larry Hagner, the CEO of the DadEdge and the host of the DadEdge podcast. I actually came across his podcast a few years ago. I was struggling with porn addiction, and I looked up, porn addiction on Spotify, and I happened to find one of his
Oh,
episodes, and I
wow.
was like, wow, this is a pretty deep and important episode, and I needed to hear it in that moment. And over the past 2 years, I ran away from porn and now I help men quit porn. But either way, I was just truly thankful for your podcast and your whole message. So thanks so much for coming on, Larry.
Oh man, it's my pleasure. I'm glad to see that Spotify likes my episodes around porn. I did not know that, but now I do.
But yeah, so I guess what inspired you or when did it click that, being a man is so important? Like, yeah, when in your life did you realize, wow, being a father is a truly important thing?
I think I really realized that at a very young age. Because I grew up in a very toxic situation with my own father and fatherhood journey meaning like when I was a kid. And, my mom was married 3 times, and there were several men that came in and out of my life that she dated in between each marriage. And all of them were pretty much the same kind of guy. So, heavy drinker, partier, drugs, abuser, that type of thing. But I will say, there was a balance, a wonderful balance that I had, and that was I only lived about a mile from my grandparents. And my grandfather, who is my mom's dad, he was just an unbelievable example of what a man should be like, what a dad should be like, how a man should treat his wife, and his role modeling was so powerful, was so amazing to me, and I didn't appreciate it back then, and I definitely do now. But my story is kind of interesting. Just to kind of level set, my mom and biological father got married really young. They were only 21. They had me 4 years later when they were 25. And then about 9 months later, an already deteriorating marriage just completely went off the rails, and they got divorced. And I think my dad tried to have some contact with me, but it just was very stressful, and my mom and him were just butting heads. And I think in his mind, he was like, it would probably be best if, maybe I just wasn't around at all. And I think that was kind of the decision that he made. So I had no recollection of my father whatsoever. And in fact, I didn't even know, really, I knew what a dad was, but I knew I didn't have one. And at the time, I'll never forget being 4 years old, and I was in preschool. And I remembered, seeing like dads come to pick up their kids. And so I knew what a dad was, but I knew I didn't have one. But it didn't bother me really, because in my mind, it was more of moms go out and find dads. That was literally like my interpretation of it. My
Mm.
mom hadn't found my dad yet, and that was fine. It didn't really bother me. So it was probably when I was 4. I'll never forget. Like my mom told me one day, she's like, "Hey, I'm having a friend over for dinner tonight, and I really want you to meet him." And I was like, "Him?" I heard the word "him," right? And I was like, "Oh wow, this must be it. This must be the dad, right?" So I'll never forget. I'll never forget this guy walking in. I'm 4 years old, and he walks in with a trench coat and briefcase and 3-piece suit, and I literally remember him like stepping into our home. And I remember like looking up at this guy like, oh my God, like that's the dad, right? That's everything I'd kind of pictured. And I shook his hand, and he smiled at me and he said, "Nice to meet you." And the first words out of my mouth was, "Are you going to be my dad?" And I just remember, like, I still remember, like, I think my mom kind of gasped. I think she was like, 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 oh my God, like, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
This guy just kind of like awkwardly laughed, and he's like, he kind of like looked at my mom, but they did end up getting married. And they got married within 6 months. And I think my mom just kind of like took that as a sign of like, I really need to, get this poor kid a dad and complete this family. And that was that. And I don't think she ever really loved him. I think she more like just loved the idea.
Mm.
And they were married for 6 years, and it was not good, man. I mean, if
Ooh.
your marriage is not based on like connection and love, that's going to rear its head. And but the intentions were there, I think. And he became incredibly abusive, and drank a lot, and he and my mom fought a lot, and it was hell. And I was 10 when they got divorced, and I remember it to this day, like getting the phone call that they were officially divorced. And there was a part of me that was kind of heartbroken, but I was also relieved because, man, I would hear them fight all the time. It just sucked. And a couple years go by, and I start to realize that this guy was not my dad. He was my stepdad. And I kind of understood what the birds and bees were, so I started asking questions. I'm like, wait, because my mom never told me. And I was like, man, like, where did I come from, Mom? Like, I know Joe wasn't my dad. And that's when she laid it on me. She's like, I was actually married before you. And I was like, I had no idea. And one thing turned into another. And I ended up meeting him when I was 12, which was very surreal. Found out he was only 3 miles from us. Had no idea. And wow. I was so excited, man. I immediately started calling him Dad. He was a business owner, married, 2-year-old son, another one on the way. Definitely had started his life over. And in comes this 12-year-old kid, right? And our relationship lasted about 6 months, unfortunately. And that was tough because I remember towards the end of our 6-month relationship, I just sensed something was off with him. I couldn't really understand what it was. And being that I'm an adult now, the way I describe it is, imagine a woman that you're dating and she's not into you anymore, but she hasn't told you yet, but you know it's coming. That's what it felt like. And I just remember picking up the phone one day and I called him and I'm like, hey, you know, like, what's going on, man? Like, I just feel there's something odd or weird. And that conversation turned into us parting ways. It was really hard, man. Really, really hard.
Wow.
And so, yeah, I kind of went into a dark hole. You know, my mom continued to date these other jokers. And, you know, I just kind of was a mess when I was a kid. And then, you know, I went on and went to college and got a career in medical device sales, became, you know, what you would on the outside successful, great career, beautiful wife, married. Fast forward till I'm 30 years old. My wife's pregnant with our first kid. I'm in a Starbucks here in St. Louis for a business meeting. And who came walking in for his morning coffee but my father? And I recognized him immediately. And that was pretty serendipitous. And we ended up connecting. And then we decided we were going to go to breakfast. And that breakfast meeting turned into what's now been an 18-year relationship with my dad.
Wow.
Yeah. So, and he's still married to the same woman. I have 2 younger half brothers. You know, he's a really successful entrepreneur, pretty good guy, just didn't make the best decisions. And so to answer your question, being that I grew up the way that I did, being a good father and having a functional marriage was insanely important to me. And I literally thought having all the things of what not to do was enough. You know, like, oh, I know I'm not going to do this stuff. But what I learned really, really quickly, that's like going to Home Depot and buying a brand new grill, and you open up the instruction manual and it says, here's 100 ways not to put this together, but everything else, best of luck. That's very messy, right? Very messy.
Yeah.
And DadEdge got started. I'm ashamed to say this. I've told this story probably over 1,000 times at this point, but first 6 years of me being a father, so my oldest was 6, my youngest at the time was 4, and I was your less than average, less than typical lost dad and husband, just winging it, just guessing, not knowing what I was doing, thought that's what I was supposed to do. If I asked for help, that was weak, but I was lost. Very little patience with my kids. You know, I didn't have the connection with my wife that I wanted to know, had no clue how to go get it. And one night, I had a really bad day at work. And let me back up for a second. Before I had kids, I made a promise to myself that I would never hit my children in anger because I was hit a lot. And the night that DadEdge got started, I became the monster that I swore to protect my kids against. And I spanked my son, my 4-year-old son. He stepped out of line. I spanked him. I didn't swat him that hard, but I swatted him hard. I'm not here to argue whether you think spanking or anybody in your audience is thinking that's right or wrong. I just didn't want to do it. Some people are just like, no, it's totally normal. And some people are like, that's abuse and everything in between. I just didn't want to do it. But I swatted him on the butt, and he fell. And see my 4-year-old son lose his footing from my hands, I was like, oh my, it was like it happened in slow motion. I was like, oh my God, what did I just do? But it got worse. meaning when I went to pick him up, he rolled over and looked at me, and I went to pick him up, and he did this. He just shuddered in fear, put his hands up, and I was like, oh my God, what the hell did I just do? And that was it. I waved the white flag. I surrendered. I was like, I'm done trying to figure this out on my own. And I need to do something different. So that began a journey of learning. And that's what DadEdge is. That's what it always has been. That's what it still is 10 years later. I'm still learning. But that's how it got started.
Wow. Yeah, that's a deep story.
Yeah.
Thanks for sharing.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I can slightly relate, not really, because I'm young. I'm not a father. But the reason I started this whole thing was porn has been my big, like, I would say, like, that's the thing that, like, truly, that wore me down the most. That was the thing I didn't like about myself the most. And I just found myself in a relationship, and my girlfriend's like, you're either going to choose porn or me. And I decided to record a video. And so, like, the first episode of this whole thing is just a journal talking about porn addiction. And that's kind of what this podcast kind of is. I'm still trying to figure it out as a young person, but I understand where it's like, sometimes you almost have to like surrender. And it's like, I have a problem, and kind of admit it almost to the world. And yeah, I major respect for having the humility to even do that. And I'm sure that, like, I'm just going to ask, I guess, once you'd started recording and talking about being a father, like, did you notice a trajectory of being a father, like, increase? Like, did you become a better dad as soon as you started doing this?
Yeah, and you actually hit the point. You hit the nail right on the head with what you just said. As soon as we surrender and bring to the awareness that, like, this is a problem. I don't have the tools, or I don't have this, or I need this. You literally take away that shame. And as soon as you peel back shame, well, now you can go to work, because now it's out there.
Yeah.
Shame is actually selfish, believe it or not. It doesn't feel that way in the moment, but shame is selfish, because shame will actually keep you from the best version of you. I say that hesitantly, because I feel like that's really overused on social media. Be the best version of you. But it's true when it comes to shame. Shame is that thing that's like, I don't know if you've ever done high school sports or anything like that, but like, one of my boys run track. I never run track, but what they'll do is they'll take like these big bands, right? And they'll put it around their waist, and they'll sprint as hard as they possibly can while the coach is holding that band, right? And, but that's what shame is like, right? As soon as you release that shame and you bring things to the awareness, and you're like, you know what? This is not who I am. This is not what I want. And I'm willing to do some work to get a better result. It's almost like, boom, that band breaks, and now you can sprint. It's the one thing that actually holds us back.
Yeah, it's an interesting analogy. And trying to understand what shame is versus what guilt is, and how, like, they're similar but different in different ways. You're saying shame is selfish, whereas what is guilt, in your opinion?
Guilt and shame are, pretty much the same thing. Guilt is where, guilt is something that it's a behavior, right? And then after the behavior, we feel some guilt about doing it, right? And guilt and shame kind of go hand in hand. It's kind of like your hand in a glove, right? It's guilt and shame. What comes first, the chicken or the egg? I don't really know.
Sure.
But guilt is something, same thing. It's going to hold you back. It's going to be that band that's going to hold you back. But guilt and shame are also levers that we can put on somebody else, right? And those levers are used quite a bit for manipulation in relationships.
Yeah, I can see what you mean. And now that you have, you had a model from your grandpa what a potentially good father is, and maybe not what the greatest father is from your dad or stepdad. Now, doing this podcast and talking with men and helping them in your program, what have you noticed? Like, what are the main characteristics of a father that is a good father? What are the characteristics of a good father that you found?
It's a good question. I mean, I think you have to operate with some core values, and most people don't even understand what their core values even are, right? I mean, we throw around things like honesty, right? And it's just a word, right? To a lot of people, it's like, oh, honesty and integrity. Honesty is, you can't build any type of foundation, any type of a relationship, even if you're a father, a husband, a friend, a son, a daughter, a relative, whatever, on someone who's going to lie, right? Someone who's going to give you lip service and tell you what you want to hear. And also being honest with yourself. That's a big one, right? Being able to look in the mirror and being like, or like, you know, like you did with porn, being like, here it is, and this sucks, but I'm going to be honest with myself of where I'm at. I need to be honest with others. It's very freeing, to be honest. Integrity, right?
Yeah.
Integrity, and this is a big one. My wife always tells me, she's like, my God, like, you never break your word to the kids, ever. Like, I could be on my deathbed feeling sick, and if I told my son I'd go out and throw a football with him that morning, and I come home and I'm feeling absolutely like garbage and like I got the flu or I got COVID or something, I'm going to still go out there and I'm going to throw that football, even if I'm sitting down.
Yeah.
You know, so integrity is, am I mad on my word, right? Another one is this. You got to have compassion, right? Compassion and empathy. A good father in my mind is compassionate. And I didn't say enabling, right? I didn't say we enable poor behavior. Compassionate is meeting someone emotionally where they're at, right? And being empathetic with that. The whole thing of like, you know, shut up, don't be weak, don't cry, what the hell is wrong with you? Only babies cry, man up, grow a set of balls. I'm talking about fathers, how they talk to their sons.
Yeah.
What I'll tell you, is there a time and a place for that? Yeah. But it's like 10% of the time. That's a lever that you pull, and I'm talking like once in a blue moon. Like,
sure,
not even that much. At the same time, you know, compassion, empathy go much further for deepening the relationship. And again, not enabling, right? Sometimes there's a little bit of tough love, even with empathy, but not anything derogatory, right?
Yeah, those are some good set of values. Honesty and integrity kind of go hand in hand.
They do, yeah.
Saying, like, you don't want to be the kind of guy who's just saying something but then doesn't follow through. Now they no longer trust you. The compassion and empathy makes a lot of sense. Like, you don't want to be compassionate to poor behavior, but you want to be maybe compassionate to them and their future self, and maybe point out like, hey, this behavior that you're engaging in is not going to be healthy for you in some sense. So it's like showing compassion. I'm just trying to think of, like, I was very blessed growing up having a father who was insanely compassionate, filled with integrity, great guy overall. I'm truly blessed, you know what I'm saying? And so I have a good model in some ways, but I wanted to hear your opinions on that. And you're saying, like, I want to switch to also your wife and how this has all impacted her. Like, in your opinion, how do you think becoming this version of a man who helps other men, how has that helped your marriage? How has that helped your wife trust you in some sense?
So that's a big one. And to be honest, from a father standpoint or even a parent standpoint, from a mom standpoint, right? When we start having kids, what most couples will do is they'll put their marriage, their relationship with their spouse on the back burner. That is a huge, huge miss. I don't subscribe to that. And I've actually have gotten some heat over that. You know, for me and my wife, it's God, marriage, kids in that order, right? Now, that's not to say, like, if one of our kids is like having an emotional breakdown or something traumatic happens or like an emergency happens or like they desperately need physical, mental, or emotional support, we don't be like, you know, mom and dad have a date night tonight. You're going to have to hold off on that. That's not what I'm saying at all. What I am saying is keep your marriage on the front burner, you know, along with your kids, right? And here's the other thing too, and this is one of the biggest misses. The divorce rate's 50%.
Yeah.
Right? But there's more to this story that we don't know. And so we always talk about like the divorce rate is 50%. However, the couples that stay together, nobody talks about that one, but I'll tell you the statistics on that one. The couples that stay together, so let's just take the other 50% of people who are still married, right? The couples that stay together, studies and polls and surveys have statistically shown the same kind of data, right? The data is this. The couples that stay together are divided up into 3 equal camps, almost identically equal, which is really weird to me, but that's what the data shows. I'm sure they're probably off by a little bit, but it's basically 1/3, 1/3, 1/3.
Sure.
Camp number 1, 1/3 of couples that stay together actually identify their relationship as working. We're still in love. We're still connected. We're there for each other. We're aligned. Everything is really, really good, right? I wouldn't really change much. That's the feedback. The next camp number 2, the next 33%, they're settled. Probably roommates to some degree, but they talk about high-level managerial things like parenting, the bills and the chores and the roles and who's doing what.
Sure.
They're kind of friends, but there's really not a whole lot of depth in the connection, or really not a whole lot of intimacy going on. We're just sort of like stagnant. And then the third camp, this is the one that none of us want to be in if we're married, and that is complete and total disconnect. Two different people living under the same roof who have totally separate lives and really don't interact. And they have 2 reasons why they don't get divorced. Number 1, it's too expensive, too financially devastating for us to split up. And number 2, we got to stay together for the kids. I don't subscribe to that one either. I'm not a fan of divorce, but I don't necessarily think you should show your kids this is how a dysfunctional relationship works. So let's talk about couple number 1. If you really boil it down, 10 to 12% of people that walk down the aisle, 1 out of 10 people, 1 out of 10 couples actually are successful and happy and fulfilled. But there's common ground there. There are common things that are happening in that relationship that make it so. And here's what it is. They don't rely, and this has been studied, they don't rely, I think it was Gottman that did this study, they don't rely on the feeling of love, right? So they're not waiting for, I just don't feel it anymore, right? And a lot of people subscribe to that. I'm just not in love with you anymore. LOVE is actually VERB. It's a verb, right? It's a verb. It's an action.
Nice.
It's not in the beginning. Let's just talk about brain function, right? You meet this woman, or if you're a woman listening to this podcast, you meet this man. Your oxytocin is going, and dopamine is firing on all cylinders. Oh my gosh, this is euphoric. I can't get enough of you. I just want to see you all the time. I want to talk to you all the time. Every time I'm around you, the entire world melts away. That only lasts for a handful of months. And a lot of people subscribe to the fact, well, that's the way it has to be always. But here's the trick, right? The trick is that a lot of people, there isn't really a whole lot of effort for us to feel those feelings because our brains really take over. Over time, it's actually the other way around. So I've been married to Jessica for 20 years. We've been together for 27 years. And here's what I can tell you.
Nice.
Love is a verb. So anytime I take action to show her love, that's when I feel that feeling again. Whenever she takes action to give me love, she feels it, and so do I. So when I show her love, she feels it, and so do I. But it's got to be the action before the feeling, not the feeling before the action. And that's the problem. So, when it comes, and getting back to your question, the reason that and I've learned this from much smarter people than me, I'm raising 4 boys. The world can't be all about them. A lot of it is, they're very important to me, right? They take up a lot of time and attention and all the good stuff, as they should. But I have a duty and a responsibility as their dad to show them this is how you love, respect, communicate, have conflict resolution with the woman that you love. And they have a front row seat to that 3 and 4D movie, right, that we're showing them. My wife is the same. She feels the need and the responsibility of I'm their mom, and it's my duty and my responsibility to show these boys what really good love looks like, and how you treat a man, how you respect a man, how you appreciate a man, how you love a man, because that way when these women come around that my boys are going to date, they're not going to stand or tolerate for anything less, because they've seen what good really looks like. And I think that's a big miss when it's all about the kids and not about us. We're missing the beautiful lesson and the example of this is what a highly functional, beautiful relationship could really look like, right?
Sure. Yeah, that's well said. I talked with this other guy maybe 6 months ago who kind of does a similar thing to you. He's a little smaller audience named Lach Haman.
Oh, cool.
And
name.
yeah, I really liked it. It's like, locked in.
Haman.
But either way, yeah. He was talking about bringing it back to the love is a verb. It's something to do with like, if you want an average relationship, like give it 50-50 or give 50% effort. That's kind of what most people do. Oh yeah, I'll give some effort sometimes when I need to. And yeah, maybe if I'm feeling it and in the mood. It's like, no, I want a way better than average relationship. I want an extraordinary relationship. I'm going to give 110%, not 50-50. I want to give 110, and whenever I do that, my wife will give me that back. And that verb of love is a true action that you have to take. And like you're saying, hopefully that would give your kids a great example of what true love is. Love is not, manipulation or resentment or pettiness. It's giving it your all. And I can't fully say because I'm not in that situation, but I'm just trying to learn from older people to set up my life in that way. And yeah, I like love is a verb is a great one. That's a great phrase that I'm going to take in. Like, I see a lot of people my age. I'm like almost done with university. And sometimes I feel like people like get into relationships for like, truly shallow reasons, physical appearance, and it's fun. But then like you just see it doesn't last more than 7 to 10 months. Because soon enough, things start to get hard. There's logistical problems. You have to start solving, like, whose career takes priority? How does all this fit together? And these kind of conversations that are hard seem to be ignored. Like, how many kids do you want? Like, how many people my age talk about in their couple, like, when they're in love, oh, how many kids should we have? How should we discipline them? What type of school? Christian school, private, homeschool, which location? These kind of hard combos. I'm just like, I happen to be very lucky and be with a woman who's really mature as well. And we talk about these things on the regular. That's not to say that I know that I'm going to have a great marriage and be a great father, but I'm trying my very best to like be that kind of man. And I really like this idea of being a great example and showing your kids that, hey, we can solve problems together. If there's a conflict, we can figure it out in a reasonable way. Yeah, I like what you're saying.
You're married? Is that right?
I am not. I've only been dating for 10 months.
10 months, okay. You know what's so cool? You're 22?
Yeah.
Here's the cool thing, man. I'm 48. And I remember being 22. I remember my 22nd birthday because it was over at my wife's in-laws. I am my in-laws.
Oh,
house,
nice.
But, I got hammered drunk. It was so fun. And they just laughed.
Sure.
They laughed their ass off at me, which was kind of funny. But, I literally think back on that time in my life when I was 22, and I did not know any relationship skills whatsoever. I was like winging it. And doing what you're doing on this podcast, interviewing people and learning and sharing it with your audience, like it is, I'm sure you've noticed this, but the learnings that you get being in the host seat, I mean, that a lot of people are like, because I've done 1,100 podcasts under DadEdge. And they're like, when are you going to stop? I was like, probably never. And they're like, why do you keep doing it? And I'm like, because it doesn't matter. Every single guest that I interview, I learn something or multiple things, right? And I'll never stop. It is the front row seat to some of the most amazing education that I will ever get, right?
For sure. Yeah, and like one of my favorite men to listen to, or when I was growing up a little bit, it was Jordan Peterson. One of his 12 rules is assume the person you're talking to knows something you don't, and that's exactly what this whole idea of conversating and podcasting has been for me. It's like, I'm just going to ask lots of questions and get nuggets from each person. And sure, maybe they're going to learn something from me too, but it's a kind of a selfish thing. Like you've maybe noticed, like, man, I'm truly learning, but it's also cool that, wow, I can now share it with others and they can come to me and say, hey, this impacted me. Yeah. So that's great.
Yeah.
And now switching to this next question. When it comes to men that come to you for your program or your mentorship community, what are the most common problems that you see that men face like list maybe the top 5 main problems that they face and come to you with.
We actually have diehard data on this.
Let's do it.
Yeah, diehard data.
That's awesome.
So when guys want to come and do life with us in our group coaching environment, one of the steps is you have to apply to be a part of it. There's a couple reasons that we have men apply, and you want to hear comically why we do it. It's not comical, but it's fascinating to me. I love learning about human behavior, right? Just what people will do, and so we have the application for a few different reasons. Reason number 1, we want to know who you are. We want to know what is most important for you, right? I mean, dude, like and 2 of the questions, I mean, it takes about 3 minutes to fill out our application, but 2 of the questions is reflection questions. Like, tell us about why are you applying? What is most important to you? And guys, man, some of the applications we get, we're like, oh my gosh, this guy totally just poured his heart out, right? Of what in detail of what's going on. Fascinating. And what that application process really does is it helps that man really self-reflect. This is what's going on in my life, and here's what I really want. And many of us don't even take that productive pause. In fact, what we were usually doing is, I don't know what I want. I just don't want what I have now. And when we do that, when we're not clear on, like, if I was celebrating what I truly want, this is what would be happening. We're just like, I just don't want what I have right now, right? And it could be a million different things. So it's a great self-reflection tool. It also gives our team, we call them the vetting team because they're not the sales team. The vetting team helps. It's a discovery call. It's not a sales call. It's to help us unpack what's going on and to see if we can even help you. And if we can't, we just refer guys. In some situations, we're like, listen, this sounds like marriage therapy to me, or maybe a counselor or something different, right?
Sure.
But in most cases, I would say it's usually a pretty good fit. So there's that. The other thing too is it gives us data on what the needs are out there. Like it really it helps us understand what are the problems men are facing out there. And here's the 4th reason, and this one's always fascinating. Just take a guess on what the finish rate to do a 3-minute application is.
You can kind of see how many people clicked the link to start it, but then how many finished.
And how many finished.
I'm going to guess 40-30%, or maybe 70-80. I don't know, one of those two.
28.2%. So that tells us some interesting things. That application, even though it literally takes 3 minutes, that's going to show us, are you going to do the work or not? Are you actually here to do work, or is this just, are you going to fluff this? Are you going to tire kick it? So it weeds out the tire kickers. Totally. And it puts the people in who are like, no, I'm serious, right? Because if we just had a click and join now button now on our thing, I worry about that. And a lot of my team is like, why can't we do that? I'm like, because we're not going to get the guys who are willing to do work. That's period. We'll get a lot of paying customers and members. That's not what we want. What we want is to change people's lives. That's what we want. But to answer your question, why do men come here? 80% of men who apply to be a part of our group have identified they want a deep, highly connected marriage with their wife that they just don't quite have right now. And they don't know how to do it, right? Or they're guessing at it. And here's the thing. I let men off the hook all the time. I'm like, if you don't know how to create an extraordinary marriage through elevated communication, connection, and intimacy, that's okay. It's not your fault. It's not like there's a class on that. We didn't learn that in high school. And usually we're not raised in an environment or by parents who did that for us, who showed us what that looks like, right? I show my boys that. And that's the huge miss. So that's the number one reason. The second reason is they want an incredible connection with their kids. And if I could really dial it in to the 2 most foundational things in each one of those areas, or the one foundational thing in each one of those areas, when it comes to marriage, I ask guys, like, what do you want more than anything? They're like, I just want to communicate with my wife. I want better communication. So it's really communication. And then with their kids, it's patience. How do I be more patient, more graceful, more calm, less reactionary, more responsive? How do I do that, right? And to be quite honest, the solutions to those dilemmas are quite simple. We're just not taught them. and then we're not held accountable to go implement them. So we just wing it and we guess, and when we wing it and we guess, we get a little lost.
Yeah. Yeah, I can see what you mean. I like your idea of, well, let's make this form somewhat deep, reflective, and it's going to weed out people that are going to, give in 30% effort. And like, oh, sure, they could join the program, but imagine the headaches of all the people who are like, yeah, I joined DadEdge and they didn't help me at all. And it's like those kind of men, why would you want them to even be in your circle? Yeah, I can totally see it. No. And yeah, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say we're all about quality. We want to, we're not in it to create massive amounts of revenue for no results. We're in it to create results. And I truly believe as a team, I mean, I've got 100 people on my payroll, and we all have the same culture. And that culture is, if we change people's lives and we give them the tools to do it and they get results, the revenue will come, and we'll worry about that later. And that's exactly what has happened. Do you want to know the 3 things that make men successful?
Sure.
You probably know this already because of what you're doing. And I just learned this. I just solidified this on Monday. And I knew what we did, but I never had. I interviewed a guy by the name of Adam Lane Smith.
Oh, yeah.
You know who he is?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, he's a licensed family therapist, and he is one of the smartest people I think I've ever talked to as it relates to like relationship dynamics and that kind of thing. His big specialty is attachment. But he has this beautiful way. He wrote a book called Exhausted Wives, Bewildered Husbands. And I was like, oh my gosh, the title of that book. And he said, tell me about this. So we talked about many things, and he simplified many things. But he said, do you want to know the 3 ways that men transform? And I'm like, yes, please. What is it? He's like, it's quite simple. The first one is you need a model. You need to know what good even looks like. And I was like, tell me about that. He's like, well, if you want to create an extraordinary marriage, like let's just take it like that, then you need to find somebody or see an extraordinary marriage and understand what does it take to get there? Like, what are the things that you do to make that? That way, when we see the model, it's like the target. Okay, now I know what good looks like. In my situation, I only knew what bad looked like, right? Laundry list of bad things, but I didn't know what that looked like. I had the model of the bad, but I didn't have the good. And here's the other thing too, psychologically, I love psychology. What we focus on grows, and what we focus on expands. So if we are like, I can't drink alcohol right now. I'm 30, I'm doing sober October. I can't drink alcohol. I shouldn't drink alcohol. Well, what are you thinking about? Thinking about freaking alcohol, right? It's like, don't think of an elephant right now, right? Harley, don't think of an elephant. No matter what you do, I don't want you to think of a pink elephant wearing a hat in front of your house right now. And that's what you're thinking of, right? So what we focus on grows, and what we focus on expands. Even if the model is negative, it's still something that subconsciously we're aiming for. This is why, like, I can't lose my patience with my kids. I can't lose my patience with my kids. Wham! Just hit my 4-year-old on the butt, right? Lost my patience. So you need to know what good looks like. You need to know where you're aiming. That's number 1.
Yep.
Number 2, skills and tools to bring the model to life. So like, for instance, if I know, I'm like, okay, I see so-and-so has a great marriage. And then I sit down and I'm like, what do you do? Oh, well, here's what I do. When I talk to my wife, I use skill sets like tactical empathy, labels, mirrors, generative questions. I create an environment of psychological safety. I know how to create the physical environment where we can have better conversations. I know her love languages, and I deliberately love her in her love language. We make all decisions through our core values, and we have a vision for our relationship. By the way, those are 9 skill sets that we teach. But that's the skills and the tools that bring that model to life, right? So we have an arsenal of things that we can pull from that we can bring that model to life. And the third one is this: be in an experiential learning environment with other like-minded men. And group coaching is one of those things. So when he told me that, I mean, I've been doing I've been facilitating our group coaching environment since 2016. Nice. And I've never heard it simplified in those 3 ways. And I'm like, oh my God. And I told the guy, I was like, that's exactly what we have in DadEdge. He goes, that's why your guys get results. And I was like, oh my God, like my head exploded. I was like, it's really that simple? He's like, yeah, it's really that simple.
Man, that's really interesting. But you need a model and then the skills and tools to bring that model into a reality. And then thirdly, being in a community of men that are all trying to shoot for a model and use those tools. That's interesting.
I got stats on that one too, if you want to hear it.
Sure.
So, and in this, again, it's kind of like human behavior, right? Meaning, and I'll share these with you. Yeah. Okay. So the American Society of Training and Development, their ASD, they did a study on this about people who are focused on goals, right? So here's where the rubber meets the road. You have a 10% success rate if you have an idea of a goal that you want. So like it could be like, I want to be healthier. You have a 10% success rate of actually being healthier if that's your goal. Now, if you consciously decide, I am going to be healthier, period, right? So you decide, now you got a 25% chance. When you decide when you are going to do it, then it goes from 25 to 40. So you're like, you know what? In 90 days, I'm going to be healthier. So now you have a 40. 50% success rate if you plan how you do it. So in 90 days, I'm going to be healthier. I'm going to clean up my diet. I'm going to work out 6 days a week. And in 90 days, I'll be better. 50%, it's still not good. It's 50% success rate. One out of two people are still going to fail. 65% if you commit to somebody that you'll do it. So it raises up a little bit, but it's still an F. So if I go outside and I tell my neighbor, I knock on his door, I'm like, hey, Dave. Dave is actually my neighbor. Dave, I've decided within the next 90 days, I'm going to get healthier. I'm going to eat better. I'm going to work out 6 days a week. Because I just told him, I now have a 65%. But here's where you get an A+.
Nice.
A 95% success rate if you have a specific accountability appointment with a person or a group once a week.
Boom.
Yeah. So every Thursday morning, right? This is my life. Every Thursday morning at 6 a.m., I meet with my 3 other accountability partners. And I have goals around my fitness, my faith, my family, my finances. Boom. And I have very specific goals and when I'm going to achieve them. And I have to answer to those guys. I'll give you an example.
Sure.
My wife and I took out a loan, home equity line of credit, and we did it to do a project. We did a $65,000 backyard project, not a pool or anything, but we put it in a project.
Sure.
Well, we all know what happened to interest rates. I had a nice little 1% introductory rate for that loan at 1%. So my payment on that was $100.
Yeah.
Well, when interest rates went up and my introductory rate expired, my payment went from 100 to 850.
Wow.
Like that.
Wow.
I was like, holy crap. I have got to get this down. So I did the whole thing. I was like, by this time next year, I will have gotten that loan from $100,000 to $19,000, and here's how I'm going to do it. And I have to snapshot my balance and the payments that go out, and I have to send it to my group because on Thursday morning, I'm going to be like, hey guys, I'm behind. But here I am. I'm on track by the end of the year to hit that goal. And here's what I can tell you. There have been so many times that I've been like, oh, I really don't want to send that payment this month. I really need this, or I could use it for that, or whatever. But I don't want to have to tell those guys I didn't do it.
Yeah.
So I do it anyway because I have to answer to it. And I don't want to be like, well, I had this thing. And they're going to be like, no, this is what you signed up for. This is what you need to do. So I'm like, okay, I'm going to eat the frog. I'm just going to do it. And I send the payment. But that's the execution. That's what will bring us from a 10% success rate to 95.
That's great. Man, yeah, I wrote down all those. That's very interesting. I'm in the process of building a community. I guess the niche is kind of the quitting porn niche, but I'm trying to figure out, because like I'm kind of a man who wants, like, my podcast is centered around these pillars of, like, faith or character building, second being health and fitness, third being finance, entrepreneurship. And it's like I'm trying to figure out, because like porn kind of held me back from being able to do any of those things.
Right.
So it's like in this group that I've built, I have a few men where we meet weekly, we talk about our plan, the tools. Like this is a nice concrete way for me to kind of really think it through, but I was kind of doing it without even realizing it, you know what I'm saying? And but now it's like I'm trying to yeah, I'm trying to do a similar thing in a different niche, I guess. But I guess the overall goal is to become a better man for your wife, for your kids, for you, and for God, if you think like that. And yeah, so I'm really thankful that you explain these tools and strategies and stats, because I totally agree. Like as soon as someone is committing to me and it's like, hey, I truly want to be done with this porn, it's like, great. You're done talking about it. It's time to take action, and you're actually wanting to come to these weekly meetings and implement these strategies. And it's like, and the people that say yes, it works out. Their fiancés or their wives are so much more thankful, and they no longer are just the talker, the guy who just, it's all about that integrity moving back. It's like, finally, I'm making a decision and choosing to do something about it, not just I should probably stop.
I should probably do
so
that.
Yeah.
It never
So
works.
And I appreciate you coming on the show. I might end this show now, and I want to just talk to you for a few more minutes off mic, if you don't mind.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, thanks for coming on. I learned a lot, and I hope everyone else did as well. So many amazing stats. Thank you.
Yeah, you bet, man.